Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You're joining us for episode 36. And folks, it is the postseason, and both our teams are dancing. The Reds and Guardians both clinch their spots in the wild card series. The Guardians are a division winner, but they still have to play in the wild card series. The Reds, they snuck their way in, the Cincinnati Reds did. So my Reds are dancing, Chris's Guardians are dancing. We're going to cover that. We're going to cover what got us here, what we think the chances look like in the wild card series. Then we got a little bit of around the league stuff, and to finish it off, we're going to treat you to revisiting our playoff predictions. And honestly, it does not look like we know ball looking over these predictions and what actually happened. But that's baseball. That's a 162 game season. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. Like you said, my Guardians are dancing, and they did it in the most poetic way possible. I'll get into that in my segment, but yeah, it's crazy that we're doing this. Who would have thought that both the Reds and the Guardians would make the playoffs in the first year we're doing this podcast? So that is really really cool, and I think it was meant to be. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe the podcast is good luck. We'll have to keep it going and hope that it is. But I'll
for
get into
sure.
my Reds because it's going to be a long one this week, it seems. So yeah, the Reds are going to the postseason. It's the first time since 2013 that the Cincinnati Reds have made the postseason in a full season. Of course, they made it in 2020 when everyone and their cousin made the postseason, and that was a postseason that Reds fans would like to forget. We were the first team to not score a run in a postseason series. Um, I'm a little worried that might happen again this year, and I'll get into that later on. But we're back at least. It's been a dozen years now. How'd the Reds get here? There are a lot of people around baseball, a lot of the national media, people who aren't Red specific, and even people who are Red specific media talking about the Reds kind of backed their way into this. And that's true. They got a lot of help from their friends. Even on the last day of the season, the Reds needed the Marlins to beat the Mets because they lost to the Brewers yesterday. And the Marlins, they knocked out the billion-dollar Mets. They beat them twice over the weekend, and they helped out another small market club that which you love to see. Um, you know, the fact that the Reds are here, yeah, they're an 83 win team. They're not really a very good offense, but the pitching staff got them here. I think if you ask people who watched a lot of Reds games this year, they'll tell you that this is an 83 win team that very easily could have been probably an 86 win team, maybe even 87, 88 wins. I don't think that was out of the question for this team. They just lost some rough ones. I mean, um, if the Reds didn't make it, that was going to be my segment this week was, look at all the games that we lost by, blowing the lead in the ninth inning or um, not being able to push a run across. This is a team that I think people are underestimating a little bit because of the record. And if you don't watch them a lot, you maybe just look at the record and some of the stats and you think, that yeah, they backed their way in because of the Mets collapsing the way they did, but I truly think this Reds team deserves to be here. I mean, sure the Mets had to collapse for us to get in, but we were the team that was there to take advantage of that Mets collapse. It was going to be someone. Why not us? So, I'm happy for my Red Legs. I'm happy for Reds country. I think it's well deserved for a lot of Reds fans. Um, at the start of this year, I wouldn't have thought this, but the Reds had the fourth lowest odds to make the playoffs in the NL per Fangraphs. They were at 20.2% lower than the Pittsburgh Pirates odds to make the playoffs coming into this season. So, here we are. We defied the odds once. Maybe we can do it again now that we've made it to October. And, it's a team that never really quit. It felt like they were down and out a lot of times this season. Obviously, if you listen to the podcast, I thought they were down and out quite a few times. Chris, I off camera, I thought they were down and out pretty much all 162. So,
You called it about 79 times this season, so
yeah, yeah. But here we are. They didn't quit, and like I said, there the if the Mets were going to collapse, there had to be a team that was going to take advantage of it, and the Reds are the team that was able to do it. So, I mean, this is a team that at one point was starting Jacob Hurtubise in Major League Baseball games. Um, and now they're in the postseason. They had a 1.6% chance to make the playoffs on September 5th. Um, so, they really turned it on the last couple weeks of the season. I think that some of that is Tito. I think a lot of that is this pitching staff, and a little bit the offense finding their footing. The team motto has become "They can't kill us." Emilio Pagan's wife wore an inflatable cockroach costume at the celebration yesterday. So, the Reds have their postseason gimmick. They're cockroaches, you can't kill them. Every good team needs a postseason gimmick if they want to make a run. We saw the Mets do it with Grimace last year. The Braves, I think, had Jock Peterson's like pearl necklace the year they made a run. So, every good team, every good postseason team needs a good postseason gimmick, and maybe the cockroach can be that for the Reds. Um, just from a fan standpoint, watching the guys celebrate in the clubhouse was awesome. This is a team that in 2023 was almost there with all the young guys. Last year, that was a really disappointing step in the wrong direction. And then, this year they made it. So it was really cool to see them get to celebrate, and it was really cool to get to celebrate myself a little bit. Um, so how did the Reds end up here? How did they make sure they were the team that was there when the Mets couldn't make it to the finish line? They went 14 and 11 in September. That's not super impressive, really. I mean, they're 3 games over 500 in September. It's not like they went on a crazy September run like the Guardians did or something like that. But what they did do is they beat the Mets in a series, they beat the Padres in a series, they swept the Cubs in four, and they beat the Brewers in a series all in September. I think if you had told me at the start of September that we were going to sweep the Cubs in 4 games and then take a series from the Brewers at American Family Field, take a series from the Brewers for the first time since 2022 in the last week and a half of the season to make the playoffs, I would have told you were crazy. But that's exactly what this team did. I mean, they're the frustrating thing about them has been they can't beat these really bad teams like the Pirates or the Athletics, and they've sort of been giant killers for a lot of this season. So, that gives me a little bit of hope going into LA. Um, the pitching staff put this team on its back the last 2 weeks. They had the third best overall ERA in baseball at a 2.77. They're tied with the Guardians for the best whip in baseball over that stretch at 0.96. And the relievers, the bullpen, they found another gear when they needed to. They have an ERA of 1.41 over the last 2 weeks. That's second in the MLB. And they have a whip of 0.81, which is a league best. One guy that really deserves a shout out of the bullpen is Connor Phillips. He's a young guy who we brought up to be a starter down the stretch in 2023, and he really struggled. The day the Reds were eliminated, they lost to the Cardinals in 2023. Connor Phillips started that game. He didn't even get out of the first inning. Um, Last year, he struggled with command all year, and he was sent to rookie ball at one point to try and figure things out because he just couldn't locate the strike zone in AAA. So he's down in rookie ball. And then this year rolls around. He's injured at the start of the year. He struggles with injuries for a lot of the year, and he gets called up, I think, in August to come out of the bullpen. And he has been lights out for the most part of the season in some pretty high leverage spots. I mean, he came in to Friday's Brewers game in a really, or maybe no, Saturday's Brewers game in a really high leverage spot, and he was able to get out of it. And yesterday he pitched really well, even though the Reds lost. He has a 1.35 ERA, a whip of 0.53, and a strikeouts per nine of 12.83 since September 1st. So he's been huge for this team down the stretch. And I think, if the Reds want to make a playoff run, he's going to be huge for them out of the bullpen as well. Now, I just want to cover some moments from the last week that, um, I think are important for this team and why we're here. Um, I didn't talk about anything last week because I didn't want to jinx anything on last week's episode because I didn't want to jinx anything. Thankfully, that ended up working out. But since I didn't want to talk, or since I didn't talk about anything last week, I just want to shout this team out for sweeping the Cubs in 4 games. That's so impressive. The Cubs are a really good ball club. To beat them in 4 games is no small feat. I was hoping I thought best case scenario, we took 3 in that series and the Reds took all 4. Hunter Green set the tone in game 1. He threw a 9 inning, 1 hit shutout. He's going to be our game one wild card starter. That's a guy that I would take over just about any pitcher in the league, I think. Um, Save maybe Paul Skeens and Tarek Skubal. The staff also threw a shutout in game four of the series. That one was, all hands on deck for that one. Andrew Abbott started that game, didn't make it through five, and then the bullpen came in and held the Cubs to no runs, and we only scored one that game, so that was really huge. And then Noelvi Marte saved the Reds season. I don't think that's a stretch to say that Noelvi Marte saved this team's season. It was the Pirates series where we had already lost the first two games of that series, and the game the night before on it was Wednesday night. The Reds rallied to come back from down 2-0. Noelvi Marte an inside the park home run. Tyler Stevenson had a home run in the bottom of the ninth to tie it. Um, we had the bases loaded in the bottom of the 11th and couldn't score, so we end up losing that game. And it's a real heartbreaker, and you begin to wonder if this team is just not going to be able to finish it. Um, and then, you come out the next day, the team puts up two runs. So the offense really struggled again. But you go into the ninth with a 2-1 lead. And in the top of the ninth inning, Brian Reynolds hits a fly ball that off the bat, I thought, oh no, here we go again. I've seen this movie a million times, and every time it breaks my heart, but I can't stop watching it, and I know how it ends. And Novi Marte leaps at the wall and brings it back and saves the Reds win, probably saves the Reds season. He's a third baseman. 2 months ago, he's a big league third baseman, and they move him to right field to go get Brian Hayes at the trade deadline. He's learning the position on the fly at the big league level, and this play that he made makes up for all the misplays in the field, considering the gravity of that situation and what it led to. Like I said, if he doesn't make that play, there's a very good chance it's the Mets that are dancing and not us. I think we probably lose that game in extras. This team has been abysmal in extras. Um, so yeah, Novi Marte probably saved the Reds season, and I think if the Reds do make a run this October, that's going to be, even if they don't, they made the postseason, and that's going to be one of those images that I think sticks with me for a really long time when I think about um, this Reds season in my mind. And then lastly, the Reds slayed their dragon. They had to go into Milwaukee and win the series basically to have a chance at October. They needed some help from the Marlins, like I said, but they had to go into Milwaukee and take a series to really have a chance. And the Brewers, as any Reds fan knows, and Chris knows, and I think people who sort of pay attention to baseball know the Brewers have had our number for a really, really, really long time. The last time we won a series against them was 2022. They were talking about it on the broadcast Friday. Aristides Aquino drove in a run in that game. If you remember Aristides Aquino, there were a lot of really some real throwback names when they were talking about the last time we won a series against the Brewers. So it was a tall task. It was not an easy feat, even though the Brewers had pretty much shored everything up by that point. We still had to go in and slay that dragon, and a lot of that is mental too. Um, the Reds take the first two. They pitch really well in game one. Zach Littell has a really great start. I was not expecting that, and then the bullpen was lights out on Friday, and then Saturday the bats came around and helped us out. Sal Stewart had a couple big hits, had a home run. Um, TJ Friedel had a big double, and we hold on to win that one 7-4. Yesterday we lost. It was a pretty bad game for the offense. I think there were some questionable managerial decisions to leave Brady Singer in for as long as he was in, but it ends up not mattering. We take that series in Milwaukee, and you really couldn't have scripted it any better that the Reds had to, finally slay that dragon to make it to the postseason, and they were able to get it done. I would have loved to have seen them celebrating in Cincinnati. I would have loved to, have had the opportunity to be at a game where they're clinching down in Cincinnati. But I think the second best place for them to celebrate was Milwaukee, just because of the history that we've had with them over the past couple of years. Now, what's next? The Reds are going to take on the Dodgers in the wild card round in LA. That's tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday if needed. We're the late slot on ESPN, so it's going to be some late nights for me. Um, Notably, the Reds have a 30-year postseason series win drought. The last team that the Reds did beat in a postseason series was the Dodgers in 1995. So, maybe a little bit more storybook ending for this Reds team in store. Um, Reds will have Hunter Green going in game one, and they'll go up against Blake Snell for the Dodgers. Now, Blake Snell's had this team's number every time he's pitched against us. We don't have good numbers against Blake Snell. He no hit the Reds with the Giants last year in September. So, it's going to be tough sledding for the offense. Thankfully, we have Hunter Green going. I think, if we didn't have Hunter Green going, I would probably say, game one is as good as lost. But Hunter Green has shown that he can step up in big moments and he can pitch in big moments and he can shut down pretty volatile lineups like the Cubs. Um, so, we have a chance. I think if the Reds can scratch across 2 runs, they have a decent shot in game one. If they can find a way to get 2 runs across on Blake Snell and Hunter Green is the Hunter Green that he needs to be, the Reds have a decent shot in game one. Game two, it's likely going to be Nick Lodolo versus Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Now, Yamamoto is a guy who, he's gross. Really good pitcher. The Reds struggled against him too. He throws a lot of nasty breaking stuff, which the Reds don't necessarily hit very well. But again, this rotation, I like our chances against, I think, probably anyone in this postseason. Nick Lodolo is a guy who's pitched really well against the Dodgers. He seems to have them figured out, knock on wood, but um, you know, it's I think we have a chance. I think. Game three, if needed, is Andrew Abbott versus Shohei Ohtani. You'd like to not get there if you're the Reds. I think if you get to game three, it's probably not going to end well for you. Um, but that's just if it's needed. Now the Reds are 1-5 against the Dodgers this season, but I think if ever there was a season to see the Dodgers in the playoffs, it's this year. They've struggled a little bit here and there. Um, they have Michael Conforto playing in the outfield, and he's been god awful. So, um, whatever the record was in the regular season, you flush it. It's the postseason now. All the stats are back at zero, um, and you have a chance. You're here now. The Dodgers bullpen has struggled, like I said, um, at points this season. They were really struggling there in mid-September when they let the Padres get back in the NL West race, and then but they've refound their form the final week of the season, which makes me a little nervous. And they added Roki Sasaki and Tyler Glasnow to the bullpen. Those are both guys that, like everyone else on the Dodgers staff, when they're on, they're pretty much unhittable. So it's the Dodgers are a really good team. We knew that coming into the season, and the Reds are going to have to play a little bit of spoiler ball. It's going to be a question of can the Reds hit enough? Because I think the pitching staff is going to hold their end of the bargain. I wouldn't be surprised to see these be, 3 or 4 run games for the Dodgers. So can the Reds manage to scratch out enough runs in these games? I think is the question. Can they get a couple guys that really get hot and carry the team? Can they get another Will Benson stretch where he gets really hot and goes on a tear? Or can Ellie get hot finally? Or is Matt McLean finally going to be able to turn a corner in the postseason? Is Austin Hayes going to come back and is he going to hit? Miguel Andujar, what's he going to do? Can Noelvi Marte get hot? They have the guys they have the team that is capable to beat this Dodgers team, I think. The pitching is good enough. It's just a question of what Reds lineup are you going to get? Are you going to get the guys who struggled to score runs against the Pirates, who admittedly have a good staff, or the guys who got shut out by the Athletics and got swept by the Athletics because they couldn't hit, or are you going to get the guys that went into Milwaukee and scored 7, put up like 11 against the Brewers, um, made Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez look silly in August. It's a question of what lineup you're going to get, and I think that's what really matters for the Reds this season. Now, do we have a chance? I've been fighting myself all day on whether or not the Reds can do this. I as a fan, I want to believe, obviously, but you know, as an objective um, sort of person, just looking at it big picture, this is the most lopsided of the four wild card series, and it's not even close. Um, with our pitching staff, though, like I've said a couple of times already, we can compete with any team in the league. I firmly believe that. I think you've seen that at different points throughout the season that this pitching staff can compete with anyone in the league, and it's a matter of the offense, really. Um, I think if they can take game one with Hunter on the mound and manage to scratch out enough against Blake Snell, I start to like our chances a lot more because in a three-game series, that's what's really the Reds' saving grace here. If this was a 5 or 7 game series, they're in a lot of trouble. But this being a 3 game series, if they can find a way to take game one, they've just got to lock into another win. Um, so it's going to be fun. I'm going to have fun. At this point, I think the Reds are playing with house money. This really isn't a team that had any business being here. They got, they're only here because the Mets couldn't figure it out. And they got hot at exactly the right time and managed to sneak in. So, I'm gonna enjoy it no matter what. This is the first real postseason I've seen in my entire adult life. I'm not counting 2020. That wasn't a real baseball season. So this is the first time since 2013 I would have been 12 years old and in seventh grade. So this is the first time since I've left middle school that the Reds are in the postseason. So if they go out there and they get swept by the Dodgers, I don't care. This has been a really fun season. They're here. I'm gonna enjoy it. And it's similar to the 2023 Diamondbacks. They were an 84 win team. They were cold going in. They got swept and they lost their last four going into the postseason in 2023. They snuck in and they made it to the World Series. So, the Reds are in a very similar spot. You're in now, see if you can't make some noise. I think they have a chance to. Um, you know, but if they don't, you know, they're here. I got to watch them celebrate making the postseason. And I think, this is a good step in the right direction for a lot of these young guys. But I'll talk more on that when and if the Reds are eliminated. But yeah, that's what I've got for my Red Legs.
Yeah, there's so much that I want to comment on, the Reds side of things. So firstly, I was thinking back to a conversation that we had before the season started. It
Hmm.
was it was about how, the Dodgers are going to win 120 games this year. What if the Reds with the power of friendship? I think I actually predicted like just in a casual conversation that the Reds were going to go 83 and 79. And we were kind of riffing when we were saying this, but it turned out to be a reality. The Dodgers did not win 120 games, but it's still an absolute on paper the Dodgers are an absolute juggernaut.
Yeah.
And the Reds are the Reds, they're sneaky. And with that starting rotation, I think that Hunter Green, I was thinking about, I didn't know that Andrew Abbott was going to be the game 3 starter. I thought
Mhm.
he was going to be the game 2 starter. And I kind of am a little bit more familiar with the first half version of this season, Andrew Abbott, who is super dominant. But I like Hunter Green over Blake Snell. And if the Reds can squeak out a win in game 1, then that really shifts the momentum. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on that is that when you're an underdog, the pressure is on the team that's supposed to win. If the team that's supposed to win gets upset, then that's going to be the main narrative throughout baseball. And it's like why, the Dodgers obviously they won the World Series last year, but they have a track record of choking in the postseason prior to last year. So I think it's still going to be a really interesting series to watch. And I think it's pretty lopsided on paper, but it's baseball, and that's why you play 162 games, and that's why you play real games as opposed to just simulating it. You
Yep.
never know what could happen. So, but with that being said, though, I'm going to get into my Guardians. Um, I was at the game on Saturday night, and the team was coming off a loss. I wasn't super worried about, they felt kind of flat. They lost to the Rangers 7-3, I believe it was. I didn't watch that entire game, but the Guardians didn't look great for a lot of that game on Saturday, but they fought tooth and nail to the last out. And we had nobody on with two outs in the bottom of the ninth inning. I thought for sure it was going to go to extras, and then Jonathan Rodriguez, who by the way was the hero of that Saturday game, super unlikely hero. I mean, he was batting cleanup. And I was there with my dad, and I was telling him, like, I don't like Jonathan Rodriguez hitting cleanup, but what do you know? He hits a two-run homer in the bottom of the first inning, and then he hits another single later on in the game, and then he gets the walk that ends up being the game-winning run. So, the Guardians, like I said, they just fought tooth and nail, and they made history. They walked it off with a hit by pitch, and that's the first time it's ever happened where a team has gotten hit by pitch to walk it off and clinch a postseason berth, and that was really really cool to see that in person. But the Guardians, they clinched the playoffs in the most Guardians way possible. The Guardians have the 29th ranked batting average in the league. They're 28th in runs scored. They finished 29th in OPS. And how Guardians is it that they didn't actually get a hit to clinch the postseason berth? So I was doing a little bit of digging, and the last time that Cleveland had a walk-off hit by pitch was in 2011. If anybody remembers Kosuke Fukudome, only the real ones remember Kosuke Fukudome, but he was the one that got hit by the pitch that walked off a random game in 2011. So that was pretty cool uh to come up with. The Guardians also finished the season with a -6 run differential despite winning 88 games. So they kind of defied all odds. Like I said, this year they broke logic, and they also are the team with the lowest batting average of all time that has made a playoff run. Um, and that's h- how the Guardians have defied logic this year. It makes this run all the more incredible. They had that stretch where they went 19 consecutive games where the starting pitcher gave up 2 runs or less. And yeah, they just, and it was on all sides of the baseball too. It wasn't just the dominant starting pitching. It was, they went 19-4 to end out the season. They outscored their opponents 103 to 53, and they scored 50 of those runs with 2 men out. They also had a 318 batting average with runners in scoring position in that 23 game stretch to end the season. The starters had an ERA of 207, and the bullpen had an ERA of 222. So they were doing everything incredibly well. And on September 4th, they were 11 and a half games back from the division, and they had a 0.1% chance of winning the division. And they did it. They just believed themselves, and they just took it one game at a time. And I don't think anybody saw that coming. Um, but I was thinking to myself about how memorable this run was, and this last month of baseball that Cleveland has had, and I can only really compare it to 2 months of baseball in recent memory. So the first one that I want to talk about is that August to September run of 2017, where Cleveland won 22 games in a row. Obviously they set the American League record in a winning streak. And this was really, really cool. And I'm not trying to take away from the 22 game winning streak, and obviously the team played a little bit better in this winning streak, but it was for a slightly shorter time frame, and it ended up, the Indians ended up cooling off a little bit. I think that ALDS was very winnable, but that's opening up a can of worms. But I think personally that this past month of baseball was more memorable just because they erased an 11 and a half game deficit with 3 weeks to go in the season. They had a 0.1% chance of winning the division. They erased a 15 and a half game deficit in the division, if you're looking at July 8th, and that made MLB history. Um, and I think that it eclipses that just because of what was at stake with the Guardians run that they went on. And they played just well enough to clinch the division. So, if they lost one of those games in there, then, they still would have won the division. But if there were two games in there, if they would have went 17-6 to finish this season, then the Guardians would not have won the division. And it's questionable to say that they would have made the playoffs. So, um, that was, that I think that I personally think that it beats that month in 2017. And the obvious other one that I was thinking of was October 2016, where they made that World Series run. I don't think that you can really hold a candle to that, that 2016 World Series run. The Indians were not supposed to be in the World Series that year. They kind of made a miracle run. And, that rain delay coupled with the Trevor Bauer injury really makes it hurt a lot thinking about um, that October 2016. But this year has the potential, if the Guardians make a deep playoff run, to be the most insane month plus of baseball that not only Guardians fans have ever seen, but like baseball fans in general. Like this is actually unprecedented what this team has done. I this 2025 team really has no business of being in the playoffs. But they just played clean baseball every day and they kind of fed off each other's energy. It was a power of friendship that got them out of the trenches really and allowed them to make that division clinching run. Um, and there's a circumstance, this is a circumstance this year where we're happy to see the Guardians in the playoffs and any success they have, at least in my opinion, and people can disagree with me here, but any playoff success that this Guardians team has is the cherry on top because like I said, this is a bottom three offense. This is a team that was at one point 40-48, and they went on a 10-game losing streak, and they went on a separate 1-9 streak. This was not a good baseball team for the majority of the year. And I was so out on this team as well as, everybody was so out on this team. And obviously they didn't really turn it on to the last month of the season, but that really goes to show that if you get hot at the right time, then anything can happen. I want to also focus on that Sunday game where, the Guardians clinched the division in the middle of the game. It was a seventh inning and the Guardians were down 5-4. And this team could have very easily just phoned it in and just stopped caring, just played lazy baseball, and nothing would have changed in the grand scheme of things. But they still played that game like it was a winner take all game. And in fact, clinching the division in the middle of the game actually gave them more energy and made them more uh, it looked like they were having more fun on the field. And that Brian Rocchio walk-off home run was absolutely electric. It was hitting that exact same spot as that Lindor grand slam from 2017. So that was really, really cool. And I'm so happy for, the progress that Brian Rocchio has made this year. I think he's going to have another huge October. He was looking pretty rough for a couple weeks there, but he had the highest team OPS in the playoffs last year, and I don't really see any reason for Brian Rocchio to not equal that production this year in the playoffs. Um, but like I said, they played their brand of baseball and they gave the crowd an extremely cool moment that everybody in that ballpark is going to remember for the rest of their lives. Hitting that three-run homer down 8-6 in the ninth inning. It's so cool. And then they got to see the Guardians celebrate on the field, and then Jose put the flag in the AL Central Division champs in the middle of the field. I mean, that was just so cool to see on TV, and it gave me goosebumps. So I can't even imagine what it felt like at the ballpark. And that was coming off a night where I witnessed some clinch. So, but it was just super cool weekend. And that kind of brings up the question, do the Guardians have a chance in October? And I think this team has as good of a chance as anybody. I think that the last month especially, they didn't just luck their way into the playoffs this year. Like they beat some legit teams and they beat a lot of really good starting pitchers. You look back to they didn't necessarily beat Tarek Skubal twice, but they rattled Tarek Skubal's cage in that last start against him, and they still managed to win the game that Tarek Skubal started prior to that. And then I think back to, Pablo Lopez, we knocked him around, and then same thing with Joe Ryan. Those are two really good pitchers. Um, there were a lot of other really good pitchers that we beat that I can't think of at the moment. But my point is that this team has played some very convincing baseball the last month, and they're hot going into the playoffs. And people say that, the 0-0 record, it wipes a clean slate and nothing matters at that point. But I think there's still something to be said for the momentum that you carry. It's human beings out there. They have they have memories and they have experiences like any other human being has. So you could very easily say that it's a clean slate, and while that is a lot of momentum to be factored into that, I think. And the pitching staff is going to have to carry the team. I think my main worry with this team in the playoffs is the offense. This team has been performing in clutch situations at a very high rate, kind of unsustainable, and it kind of makes me wonder if that luck is going to run out this month. I really hope it doesn't, and I don't really see any reason why it's not going to. But at the same time, I think there are some questionable things that I've seen from this team in the past week. They have looked mortal, so it'll be really interesting to see how they come out against the Tigers. And I think back to last year when the Guardians scored 5 runs in the first inning against Tyler Holden in Game 1 of the ALDS. It looked like they hadn't skipped a beat. So I'm really looking forward to watching that game tomorrow. So um, and this team has also proven me wrong so many times throughout the years. So I wouldn't rule anything out. I'm not expecting this team to win the World Series, but like I said, any playoff success is the cherry on top for what has been a super memorable season. So last thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to preview the wild card series. So all three starters were announced for the Guardians. So Tarek Skubal, like I said, is going tomorrow, and he's facing Gavin Williams. Um, like I said earlier, the Guardians have won 2 games in a row against Tarek Skubal, and they need to keep the pressure on him throughout the game. And they need to rattle his cage. They need to make him field the ball. They need to put the ball in play. They need to work at bats. They need to be annoying, and that's how they're going to beat this team with Tarek Skubal on the mound. And I think they really have found that formula the last 2 times with Tarek Skubal on the mound, but that doesn't take away from how hard it is to beat the Tigers with Tarek Skubal on the mound. And I really like Gavin Williams being our game one starter. I think that as long as he can limit the early walks and command the baseball, then I think he's going to go toe to toe with Tarek Skubal, kind of like he did the last matchup where they were facing each other. So I think game one could go either way with that crowded Progressive Field. I kind of worry about the 108 start time if the stadium is going to be packed or not. But nonetheless, Progressive Field is an electric playoff atmosphere, and I think people are going to show out. At least I hope so. Now, game two, Tanner Bybee is our starter, and it's to be determined games 2 and 3 for the Tigers. But I think that most likely it's going to be Jack Flaherty who starts game two. Now the Tigers could also throw a bullpen game in game two, and that would be super interesting if they do that. I think Chris Paddock has the potential of throwing a couple innings. Maybe they throw um, I don't know, Casey Mize for if I don't know. There's a lot that could happen. I think the Tigers are taking it day by day. If they win tomorrow, then they might change their plans up a little bit, but we'll see. Game three is Slate Cecconi on the mound. And my guess is that they're only going to let Slade go one time through the order if a game three does happen. We have the rosters have not been released at this moment. It's about 8 o'clock on Monday night. And um, I think that Messick and or Cantillo is going to carry some of that weight with I think Slate's going to go maybe 3 innings max, and then you bring in Messick or Cantillo to go a few more innings, and then you have your back end of the bullpen come in if needed. So, and yeah, like I was talking about with the roster, I think that Logan Allen and Zach Kent are the two cuts. Now, the reason I think Logan Allen is not going to be on the roster is pretty simple. He pitched on Sunday, so he's going to be unavailable for the whole series. And then Zach Kent is just kind of the odd man out. Um, Messick and Cantillo are most likely going to be in. I don't see a reason why Messick or Cantillo are not on the wild card roster. So I think Kent is going to get cut. So it's a 26-man roster for the playoffs, and it's a 28-man roster that they were just on. So um, yeah, I'm so excited for this wild card series. So that's all I
Yeah.
got for the Guardians.
Yeah, so when you were talking about, some of the Guardians' offensive struggles, um, and how that concerns you a little bit, it reminded me of a stat that I saw today that I wanted to mention when I was talking about the Reds. So I'll just mention it real quick now. The Reds are the first team in a non-shortened season to have no qualifying batter hit 270, no batter hit 25 home runs, no pitcher win 15 games, and no pitcher have 200 strikeouts and still make the playoffs. So, it's this Reds team is not very good.
Those are
There's
old-fashioned stats, though.
they are old fashioned. I mean, home runs are king.
Yeah,
Um,
in Great American, that's a little, the Reds should have a hitter that hits
yeah,
25 home runs. Let's be real here.
yeah. But hey, both our teams are here despite whatever the offenses are. And the 200 strikeout thing and the 15 win thing, it's whatever.
Yeah, it's a wash.
Hunter Green gets to 200 if he's healthy all year. Pitcher wins mean absolutely nothing. So I think these two teams, despite some differences in records and despite how hot they got at times this season and how cold they got at times this season, they're two very similar teams. They're teams that, the Guardians are hitting a little bit better right now, but if you look at the stats, they aren't a great hitting team. They're two teams that are gonna have to rely on their arms to get them through the postseason, and you know, pitching means a lot more in the postseason than I think it does in the regular season. You can get by. I mean, look at the Mets. Their pitching staff was terrible for a lot of this year, and they almost made the playoffs because they can just hit the ball out of the yard. And in the regular season, you can get by doing that quite a bit, I think. Obviously there are the teams that like the White Sox or the Rockies who are just, their pitching is really bad and they don't have the offense to make up for it. But, if the Mets had made the postseason, I think I would feel worse about the Mets against the Dodgers than I do the Reds against the Dodgers when it comes to chances to beat the Dodgers in this wild card series. So, pitching matters a lot. And I think that works in both the Reds and the Guardians' favor when it comes to October baseball.
Yeah, I didn't even touch on how I've talked about it in previous episodes, but how different the starting pitching staff is this year. This is the starting pitching staff is what got the Guardians into the playoffs this year. Now, last year it was a little bit of everything. It was the bullpen and about a league average offense that got the
Right.
Guardians to 92 wins last year. But the Tanner Bybee and Gavin Williams have been pitching like aces the last month. And that's something that postseason teams do not want to see is a 1-2 punch that is really, they could go toe to toe with anybody.
Yeah.
And that's something that the Guardians didn't have last year, and they still made the ALCS.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not saying they're going to make the World Series, but it gives them a lot better chance um, than, just relying on a bullpen to
Right.
get you all of your innings.
Right. Hey, and at least for at least 2 more days, we can dream on an I-71 World Series and a One American Baseball Podcast World Series. So, we've got at least 2 more days of dreaming of that, which is nice. But let's get into our around the league segment. That was a long weekly breakdown for both our teams. So we'll be quick and around the league. Um, ABS is coming next year. The MLB officially announced it. They held the vote, and we are getting ABS next year. Now, teams get two challenges, and they retain those if successful. Only the hitter, the pitcher, or the catcher can challenge. Um, Basically what we saw in spring training this year. The writing was on the wall for this all season. I think, we've discussed it at length a couple of times. It's good for the game to get this implemented. I Not much more to say other than that.
Yeah, I don't know how people are against ABS.
Yeah.
I've seen, uh Trevor Plouffe is catching it straight here, but I was watching the John Boy guys, and I think it was Trevor Plouffe who's against ABS, but there's just not a very good argument to be made for ABS not being part of baseball, and especially the way that it's integrated in the game. It adds an extra element of strategy, and I think that adding extra elements of strategy never really hurts anything. So
Yeah, it's good. It improves the game. I think it'll probably help grow the game. I think the next thing, we've got reviews now, and now we're getting ABS. I think they're working on check swing technology in the minor leagues, so you don't have
they need
to.
to do that.
It's
Yeah,
a coin flip. No one knows what a check swing is. I don't think the
yeah.
umpires do. So
Well,
they're working on
yeah.
technology, I think, to be able to tell for sure. And so hopefully that comes soon.
Well, yeah, because everybody stands at a different spot in the box, so it's like, how
Right.
do you even tell? And they're starting to like, there's those metrics of like where people stand in the box. That's super cool. I haven't really seen any of those on Statcast or Baseball Savant or any of those websites, but
Mhm.
I've heard that that is a thing that's coming down pretty soon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Next point, Cal Raleigh gets to 60 home runs. Um, just a nice round number for him to get to. I think, we've both talked about why we think he's the AL MVP, but to get to 60 for a catcher is just insane. Um, I sadly don't think they're going to give him the MVP. I think it's going to be some Yankee bias, but if I had a vote, like I've said in the past, Cal Raleigh gets my vote, and you know, getting to 60 can only help his chances.
yeah, I mean, we kind of beat this topic to a dead horse, but to kind of like just sum it all up, he he creates runs at elite rate and he prevents runs at elite rate. He was a Platinum Glover last year catcher, and he manages one of the best pitching staffs in baseball. And he didn't allow any pass balls or anything like that all year. So I mean, winning baseball games is all about scoring more runs than your opponent. And from a pure standpoint of that, Cal Raleigh has helped his team the most in that
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Next one here, Astros missed the postseason for the first time since 2016. I think, the Astros dynasty is one that I thought was ending at several points before this year, and then I thought it was going to end this year, and they were in it for the Mariners like swept them last weekend, I think, to kind of put the nail in the coffin, but they were in it for a really long time. Um, so this might be the end of the Astros dynasty, but I don't think I'm going to count them out. And I think I learned my lesson counting them out and counting the Brewers out because I thought the Brewers were going to be really bad this year, and here they are. So but it'll be strange to not have a postseason with the Astros. But I am not a huge Astros fan, so I don't mind seeing them not make it.
Yeah, I don't think this is the end of the line for the Astros dynasty personally. They had so many injuries this year. And I think just with if Yordan Alvarez had played 140 games this year,
Mm,
I think the Astros would have snuck in. Because, Yordan Alvarez was an MVP candidate last year, and he did basically nothing for the Astros this year. And you also had so many injuries on their pitching staff and just kind of all around their lineup. And I think as long as, Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa are on the team, I think they're just kind of they're gonna keep building around those
mm,
guys. So that's my take on it. And then, Mike Trout kind of put the nail in the coffin for the Astros. So that was super cool to see the Angels kind of help the Guardians a little bit and at least take a little bit of pressure off from having that Rangers series be super must-win baseball. So
Yeah. Next one here, we've got a
yeah,
couple manager firings
couple
this
manager
week.
firings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you want
so
to get into them.
Rocco Baldelli of the Twins got fired. He's not a good manager. I've watched so many games that the Guardians have played the Twins, and they have won so many close games. And that, when you win a lot of close and late games, that a lot of that comes down to the managerial decisions. And it doesn't see, this Twins team, they have such a talented roster year in and year out. And I know that they're very injury prone. Buxton and Royce Lewis are some of the most injury prone players in baseball, and you can't really prevent that. But at the same time, they tore this roster down because they weren't living up to expectations. So it's just like, why even try? And I think a lot of that is it starts at the culture you create. And I just doesn't it didn't seem like the Twins had a very good culture. They had that debacle with Griffin Jacks this year, and I don't think that I think that's a little bit above Rocco Baldelli's pay grade. But at the same time, you got to be communicating with your players if they're on the trading block. Like it's just you're dealing with a human being, and it's yeah. I'll leave it at that. Rocco Baldelli got fired. It was overdue. And then Bob Melvin also. It was kind of a more of a mutual thing for Bob Melvin, but he is no longer he is not going to be the Giants manager next year. So I've already heard rumors of Bruce Bochy taking over for the Giants next year, which I think would be super interesting. So
Yeah, Boch was their manager um, during those mid 2000s even year dynasty teams with Buster Posey and Pablo Sandoval and all those guys. How old is Bruce Bochy? He's got to be getting up there, right?
man, I don't know. He's looked about the same age for the last 15 years.
He is let me see here. Oh, geez. He was born in 1955. He's 70 years old. I
55.
mean,
Yeah.
uh, it's pretty old, but like guys manage forever. So,
Hmm.
and he's familiar with the Giants. Buster Posey is like the Giants GM or president of baseball ops or something now.
Yeah.
I'm sure Boch loves Buster Posey. Um, I'm sure Buster Posey has a lot of sway on him. So, I guess I wouldn't be too surprised, but
I
I
could
don't know.
see a reunion.
I would
I could
also
see
be
a
pretty
reunion in Bay
surprised.
Area.
And Bochy taking over that team, I think that would be pretty scary. I think that makes the Giants contenders pretty quick. I mean, that's a good lineup, and a good pitching staff with Logan Webb. So, they get a good manager in there. Bob Melvin was an all right manager, but Bruce
Yeah,
Bochy's,
I think Bob Melvin gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I think he was a good manager, but
yeah.
that's
I
just me.
mean, Bruce Bochy's on a different level. I mean,
He
he
is, yeah.
led the
He's on
Rangers to
like
a
a
World
Tito
Series.
level.
He's Tito.
Yeah.
He's the same as Tito. So, but yeah,
Hmm.
that's all we have for around the league. And we're gonna close it out by revisiting our playoff predictions. We made these in episode 2, I think, is what it was
Yeah.
when we
Long time
we
ago.
predicted the playoffs. That was in February. It was in our
Yep.
infancy. We weren't on YouTube then. A lot has changed. So I'll kick it off with my playoff predictions. I picked the Royals to win the AL Central. That was a terrible pick. They missed the playoffs entirely. I I don't know what went wrong for the Royals this year, honestly. I think, Bobby Witt Jr. took a step back. He was still a good player, but he took a step back. The pitching staff is not what it was last year, I think is the big problem. And they were losers of that Jonathan India trade. Jonathan India, they lost a lot of value from Brady Singer and didn't get really anything from Jonathan India. So, really bad pick by me in the AL Central. This was episode 2, so I picked with my heart in the NL Central. I picked my Reds. They're a wild card team. They're dancing. So, at least they made it, and it wasn't as bad as my Royals AL Central pick. Um, had the Red Sox winning the AL East, they finish as a wild card team. The AL East was really good this year. Um, you know, but I think the Red Sox didn't meet expectations all the way. I think they probably could have won this division. Alex Cora said something when they clinched, like nobody had us winning this division, nobody had us making the postseason, which is just nonsense. They were the best team in the AL East coming into the year on paper, I think. So, but that one didn't come true. Picked the Mets to win the NL East. We all know how that went. Um, had the Rangers winning the AL West. They missed the playoffs entirely. That was a lot of injuries and stuff, and their offense was non-existent this year for some reason. I don't know what was going on with the Rangers offense this year. Then the Dodgers went to win the NL West, so I went 1 for 6 in division winners. Pretty bad. Dodgers were the chalk pick, and thankfully they helped me out a little bit there. Um, in the wild card, I had the Astros, Yankees, and Tigers making it as the wild card teams. So the Tigers and the Yankees make it as wild card teams. So I got 2 out of 3 AL wild card teams right. The Astros missed the playoffs. The Red Sox are that third wild card team, and the Blue Jays win the NL East. Is how that ended up going. Then I had the Cubs, the Diamondbacks, and the Phillies making it as wild card teams in the NL. The Cubs make it as a wild card team. The Phillies win the NL East. The Diamondbacks miss out on the playoffs. The Brewers won the NL Central, and the Reds are a wild card team. So that's how it shook out in the NL. So I did better in my wild card team picks than my division winner picks.
Yeah, I think the wild card teams are a little bit easier.
Yeah,
I went 1 for 6 in my division picks as well, so I was no better. I picked the Tigers to win the AL Central, which was a little bit of a better pick than the
yeah,
Royals.
yeah,
However, we all know how the Tigers season went. They should have won that division, but they didn't. And I also picked the Cubs to win the NL Central. So they finished 92 and 70 and got the top wild card. The Cubs had the best roster in that NL Central. I
yeah,
don't think there's really any argument to be made for that. They have one of the best rosters in all of baseball. Um, and the Brewers just used their voodoo magic to win that NL Central. So there's not much else to be said there. I also picked the Red Sox to win the AL East. I think they still are, they almost won that division. They were a couple of games out. So the Mets had historically one of the biggest collapses we've ever seen. They had a really promising looking roster, but their pitching staff didn't really do it for them. And then I picked the Rangers to win the AL West. Yeah, like Jaden said, their offense was just very not good this year. And then they had a lot of injuries as well, so that kind of held them back a lot. I had the Dodgers win the NL West, so we both got the Dodgers right, and that was the only team that we correctly picked. Now for the wild card and on the AL side, I had the Guardians, Astros, and Yankees making the wild card. So the Astros did not make it. I did not have the Mariners in the playoffs. I also um, did not have the Blue Jays in the playoffs. So I probably the Mariners were not a good pick. The Blue Jays just kind of snuck up on me. I kind of overlooked them, I'll be honest. They were not very good last year, and they still have a really solid roster, but Blue Jays were really good this year. So I definitely missed that. And on the National League side, I had the Diamondbacks, Phillies, and Braves being the National League wildcard teams. The Diamondbacks, if they didn't tear it down, I mean, they still have one of the best offenses in all of baseball this year.
Mhm.
Their pitching staff was a huge letdown. Brandon Pfaadt had a really shaky season. Um, I'm trying to think. Merrill Kelly got traded at the trade deadline. He had a
Zach
really good
Gallen
year, but
was
he
bad this year.
he had a pretty good ERA.
Did he finish with a good ERA?
Yeah, he did.
Okay,
He started really bad
yeah.
to begin the season, but then he got a lot better as the season went on. So, but Merrill Kelly would have been a huge help for the Diamondbacks down the stretch. And there's a few other Diamondback starters that Zach Gallen had a really disappointing season as well.
Mhm.
So that held him back a lot. And then I had the Phillies being a wild card team, and yeah, the Braves were ravaged by injuries this year. I mean, they had an entire starting pitching staff on the injured list for the last couple months of the season, and the Braves are a really good team. They just, yeah, injury bug got them this year. So I don't think I did too bad. Yeah, there were some unfortunate picks in
Yeah,
my
it's
in
tough
my
with a
list.
162 game season. It's tough to predict. And yeah, it was episode 2, so at least we can use that excuse
Yeah.
if we need to. If anyone questions how much we know about baseball, we'll say it was episode 2. Um, but that's all we have. It was a pretty long episode this week, so if you stuck it out, thanks so much for listening. It's going to be an exciting week of baseball. The postseason is always a ton of fun. Um, Tigers and Guardians get it kicked off tomorrow on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and then the Cubs and Padres go at 3. Um, Red Sox and Yankees is going to be awesome in the wild card series. They go at 6, and then my Reds take on the Dodgers at 9 for your nightcap. So tune in if you get the chance. Tune into all of them because postseason baseball is electric. I'm going to try to tune into as many innings of all those games as I can. But like I said, if you made it this far, thanks so much. Um, Leave a like on YouTube. Comment down below. How you feel about the Reds or the Guardians in the postseason, depending on what team you root for. If you root for a different team in the postseason, comment down below if you like their chances. If you root for a team that didn't make it, what went wrong? Let us know. We can talk about it some point this off season. Um, but thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.